To begin with our first session, I would invite Dr. Nikunj to initiate the session. So, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Samruddhi. So, good morning to all. Thank you for joining on Sunday early morning. I'll just start sharing my screen to give an overview about our instruction course. So, today, this IC is about corneal emergencies, all you need to know. So we all know that corneal emergencies are one of the most common emergencies in ophthalmic setup, and poorly managed corneal emergencies are important cause of blindness and especially in a developing country. So this IC aims to discuss the step-by-step manner of early and immediate management of different corneal emergencies, from corneal foreign bodies, managing corneal epithelial challenges, corneoscleral tears, chemical injuries, management of perforated corneal ulcers, management of emergencies post-refractive surgery, which generally is not talked about, and also the cherry on the top is medical legal aspects from the respected Deshpande sir. So I would like to invite Dr. Nidhi first. So let me introduce her. Dr. Nidhi Gadkar is currently a consultant for cornea and cataract services at Kashyap Memorial Eye Hospital in Ranchi. She has done a post-graduation from Regional Institute of Ahmedabad, where she was my colleague. She has pursued a training in cornea under Dr. Samar Basak sir at Disha Eye Hospital. She has presented papers and posters at national and international conferences and has won awards for the same. Over to you, Dr. Nidhi.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes.
Okay. So, just a second. Is it visible, Nikunj?
Yeah, it's visible, but it's not full screen yet. Yeah, you should start. Yeah.
Just a second. It was showing a new share. Just a second.
You are not in the slideshow mode, Nidhi. Yeah, now you are. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Nikunj, for including me. I'll be talking about corneal foreign body. Not so difficult, not so easy. I have no financial interest. So the presentation, removal, and sequelae of a corneal foreign body can be simple to complex. Timely and aseptic removal is important to prevent infection, inflammation, scarring, and vision loss. The mode of injury majority happens at work involving high-risk activities, lack of or ill-fitting protective gear, and it can be accidental due to projectile foreign bodies. Presentation could be acute present with vascularization or infiltration. They can have epithelialization over the foreign body, and the foreign body could superficially or deeper migration could happen. Looking at the history and examination, mechanism of injury is very important, and the duration. On examination, always avert the lids and see the material, what it is. Is it inert, metallic, or vegetative? Are the foreign bodies single or multiple? They are present at what depth, and how is the surrounding tissue? Is it healthy? Is there infiltrate or vascularization? Also look for associated anterior chamber inflammation or infection. What is the lens status, or any endophthalmitis, which might be happening very commonly in such cases. So after the removal, management includes management of epithelial defect, antibiotic prophylaxis has to be given, treat any infection or anterior chamber inflammation if present. In cases of vegetative foreign body, avoid steroids and avoid patching after removal. So methods of removal, for superficial foreign bodies, we can remove them with irrigation for multiple superficial foreign bodies, or use a moist tip cotton applicator, 26 gauge needle, jeweler's forceps, a diamond burr, or use a magnetic spud. Now, this is the most common case scenario which all of us see in our OPDs, a metallic foreign body. And to remove this, after topical anesthesia, insert a 26 gauge needle at a tangential angle to prevent perforation with the bevel up, and gently loosen the sides. The rust ring which might remain after this needs to be removed, as it slows down healing and causes localized stromal necrosis. Serial removal of rust rings can also be done as they migrate superficial. So these are a few of the complications that can happen after foreign body removal, like stromal necrosis, secondary iritis due to incomplete removal, Post removal, there could be an infectious keratitis, hypopaeon. Some cases in excessive picking of the foreign body can lead to a tissue defect and microperforation. Here in this case, later we treated it with a tissue patch graft with cyanoacrylate glue, and it healed nicely. Now, in cases of multiple foreign bodies, they might be present at various depths. Here, try to remove only the superficial ones so that epithelialization occurs. If you try to pick on the mid-stromal and deeper than that foreign bodies, it might lead to stromal scarring, which might hinder the vision more. In cases of deep foreign body, again, location in the cornea needs to be seen through slit beam examination or confirmed by ASOCT. B-scan, ultrasound or CT scan should be done in cases of multiple or very deep foreign bodies to rule out intraocular foreign body. So the localization with slit lamp. Removal should be always done in the OT. Cedars test is important in cases of deep foreign body to rule out microperforations and watch out for lens injury. Standby, always have a bandage contact lens, cyanoacrylate glue, that is most important. Apart from that, fibrin glue might be required, suturing might be required, intrastromal antifungals might be required. If there's an associated infiltrate, scraping can be done for gram KVH or culture. Also, other adjuncts like amniotic membrane graft, Tenon's patch graft, tissue patch graft, or a pedicle conjunctival graft may be required intraoperatively. The decision can be made then. There. So the patient for risk case looks like a stromal infiltrate on slit lamp, then there is intrastromal foreign body extending up to the anterior chamber confirmed by ASOCT. Here also there is an infiltrate, but on looking further, there was intrastromal foreign body, difficult to see, confirmed by OCT. So in cases of intrastromal foreign body having vegetative matter, they become very soggy after a while. So the removal might be piecemeal. While removing, we have to take care not to push the foreign body further deep and remove all the existing debris. Here, I'm just doing an intrastromal wash and using amphotericin B only, so it acts like an intrastromal injection. The anterior chamber was then cleared of the infiltrate exudates. Now, sometimes you might have a patient who has had foreign body removal outside. But if you see here, there still looks like some residue. So after epithelialization also has occurred, you need to freshen the wound again and do a proper wound toileting to remove all the debris. Sometimes patient can present make the wound there is
Dr. Nidhi, we have lost actually.
Again, thorn injury, infiltrate might be present. Look for the foreign body. Bee sting. This case presented just as an infiltrate present. Caterpillar hair, more common in the belt that I work in. So these are very fine, brittle, and have single. They can be single or multiple, superficial, and can enter inside up to the vitreous. They cause granulomatous reaction and steroids are indicated. However, if very deep, better to leave them as removal will cause scarring. No intervention if there is a posterior stromal foreign body. If it is inert, it can be there. And in cases of anterior or mid-stromal foreign body, removal can cause scarring. So you can leave it there if they are inert. So take home points: timely removal, complete removal, always avert the lids, treat associated infection, keep backup armamentarium, and always tell the patient that protective glasses are required. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nidhi. It was a wonderful presentation and a very good collection of images as well as videos. Next, we have Dr. Tushar Grover. Dr. Tushar is a proficient young surgeon specializing in cataract, cornea, and refractive surgery at Vision Eye Care, New Delhi. He was also an ex-fellow from Narayan Nethralaya, Bangalore, where we became very good friends. He has delivered as a talk as an invited faculty and presented research papers at various national and international conferences, and he has also won awards for the same. Over to you, Dr. Tushar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nikunj, for having me in your IC. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just share my screen. Okay. So I'll be talking about managing corneal epithelial challenges. So I'll be trying to cover probably not all of them, but some of them. So one of the most common challenges that we really have in our OPD is a corneal epithelial defect. So when you get a corneal epithelial defect in your clinic, it's extremely important to try to identify the cause first. You know, things like mechanical trauma, etc., is quite obvious and can be treated with simple patching or a bandage contact lens if there is no infection suspected. But you also need to look for the possibility of exposure, dry eye, any limbal stem cell deficiency. Also take a look at the other eye, and if there is any infiltration present along with that epithelial defect. So even when you have an apparently clearly visible epithelial defect, it's very important to stain with fluorescein, which might give you a lot of hints and a lot of clues to what is causing that epithelial defect. Look for corneal sensations. Sometimes, you know, you get a very aggressive picture where you have even a slight hypopyon, scant infiltration, and you realize that it's just a neurotrophic cornea with a persistent epithelial defect that's been going on for a very long time. Try to rule out dry eye, because that's also a common cause for all kinds of corneal epithelial issues. If you see any infiltration along with that epithelial, along with the epithelial defect, do scrape it and send it for smear and culture, even if, you know, it's just a suspicion that you have, even if you're not sure that it's infective. A lot of these corneas, as I said, are neurotrophic corneas. You know, we know of the causes, and we need to treat these a little more aggressively, because these are issues that, I mean, these are defects and these are problems that tend to persist, and you don't get rid of them very easily. This is the 3-stage classification of neurotrophic corneas, where in stage 1, you're just starting to have epithelial breakdown. You have punctate epithelial erosions, you have some epithelial hypertrophy, and all of these things. So here you have to basically try and prevent epithelial breakdown from happening, improving the health of the ocular surface. So any medications, topical or systemic, that are causing the ocular surface issues should be stopped, and any other associated ocular surface diseases that exist should be treated. Stage 2 is when you start getting the epithelial defect, which is quite often paracentral. So here in this stage, often the bandage contact lens works well. Do give topical antibiotics, but do monitor the patient frequently. And if it's an inflammatory cause, you can give a short pulse of steroids, provided you're absolutely sure that there is no infection happening at this point of time. The third stage is when the ulcer starts developing. You know, you have thinning that starts, corneal melt starts. So there you need to intervene a lot more aggressively, go in for tarsorrhaphy as soon as you can, put in an amniotic membrane as well, because that really helps with the healing. And if you're getting close to, you know, having a perforation, try and prevent that first by using a cyanoacrylate glue, and, you know, manage perforations. If it's a small perforations, you can put a Tenon's patch graft there as well in non-infective perforations. Keratoplasty is, of course, the last option and would be done only for tectonic purposes, because you would have not a great prognosis with a keratoplasty in these cases. If you had issues in the cornea, which is a neurotrophic cornea, you are likely to have similar issues in the graft as well. So for absolutely tectonic purposes, yes, but, you know, that has to be the absolute last resort, because you don't expect great outcomes in those grafts. There are some various molecules that are being researched which can really help us in the future to get better control and manage these corneas better. Corneal neurotization, where you're trying to basically bring back the neuronal supply of an area which has neuropathy, is also gaining popularity, gaining prominence. A lot of people are talking about it, and let's hope that maybe in a few years we'll get somewhere with it. So the next thing is that we commonly see is the presence of abrasions and punctate epithelial erosions. So here again, you need to do a very complete eye examination, stain with fluorescein, because that tells you the pattern, and that really points to the etiology there. As Dr. Nidhi also pointed out, looking for a foreign body is extremely important. I mean, you do a double eversion here, and if you see pattern, particularly vertical abrasions, very highly suggestive of a foreign body in the upper tarsal conjunctiva. The caterpillar hairs in the cornea were shown, but you often have caterpillar hairs in the tarsal conjunctiva as well, and very frequently missed. You often have patients who've been treated on something for multiple times and not recovering. The corneal abrasions are persisting. There are epithelial defects that have started to develop, and patients are just not improving. And when you just look in the tarsal conjunctiva, you'll see these caterpillar hairs which are projecting out and causing all these problems in the cornea. So extremely important to look for them, and you just need to take them out in toto using non-tooth forceps, and the problem dramatically resolves within a few days. What we're also starting to see these days quite often is post-surgical epitheliopathy, a lot to do with the disturbance of the nerve supply, say post-LASIK, also the dry eye that surgeries cause. So again, that needs to be managed aggressively with lubricants, and usually they do recover quite well with treatment. When you have punctate epithelial erosions, like I said, do look for the location. So that really points to the etiology. If you have superior erosions, it points towards things like superior limbic keratoconjunctivitis, or a vernal keratoconjunctivitis with papillary reaction. If you have diffuse or interpalpebral, it's because of dry eye. Because of diffuse is because of viral conjunctivitis quite often. So it really, you need to look at where your erosions are and then look for the etiology. The next common thing that we see quite often is filamentary keratitis. So these are, as we know, mucoepithelioid strands that are adherent to the corneal surface. And here again, unfortunately, one of the most common issues is the presence of dry eye, which causes these filaments to happen. So if you have them on the lower third of the cornea, that's most commonly because of dry eye. If you have them in the upper third, that's quite commonly because of superior limbic keratoconjunctivitis. So here again, treat the underlying cause. Frequent lubrication helps. Topical hypertonic saline helps the epithelium adhere better to the underlying stroma. So that is quite useful as well. Filament should be removed with jeweler's forceps. So that's a temporary measure. And topical corticosteroids, if indicated, if it's inflammatory, topical N-acetylcysteine helps with them as well. So, and bandage contact lenses. So in the interest of time, I'll move quickly to the management of corneal infiltrates. So here again, if you have any suspicion, scrape, look for patterns that suggest a viral keratitis. Sometimes you would not know, you would have vascularized opacities. You might have gone ahead with a graft in the interest of the patient, but you have these viral keratitis, epithelial keratitis that develops, and that's when you realize that the etiology was viral keratitis. If you have an infiltrate, treat them ideally after doing culture with drug sensitivity, and that should really dictate the medication that you use. Infective keratitis, next generation sequencing is one of the modalities that will really help us improve our isolation of organisms. Right now, we have a lot of culture negative infections where we don't get the organism. So next generation sequencing will help with that. We do know, like these are these marginal infiltrates we see quite often, sterile infiltrates. So very important to differentiate them. And these are quite common signs, and we all know how to differentiate the sterile infiltrates. So epithelial defects, treat aggressively if you have to. Do not delay treatment. With epitheliopathy, look for the location because that points towards the etiology. Filamentary keratitis, we discussed the modalities. Dry eye is the most common risk factor. And with corneal infiltrates, differentiate sterile from infectious, but in case of any suspicion, go for scraping, see if you can find an organism. Don't hesitate in scraping and sending the sample. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tushar, for that excellent presentation. Moving on to the next talk, which will be given by Dr. Karan. Dr. Karan is Head of Department of Cornea Services at Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, Sitapur. He is an excellent cornea, cataract, and refractive surgeon. He has done his fellowship from MM Joshi Eye Hospital, Hubli. He is also Joint Secretary of YOSI and Chief Editor of YouTube, which is the official YouTube channel of the YOSI. He has also been my mentor and my best friend. Over to you, Dr. Karan.
Thank you so much, Nikunj, for that wonderful introduction. Congratulations to the speakers who spoke previously, who've spoken really well. So my topic given by Nikunj is perforated corneal ulcers, save the eye, save the sight. So as you can see over here, coronavirus has had a deep impact. So as you can see, coronavirus has had a deep impact on all of us with so many confirmed cases and deaths across the world. The numbers are quite staggering, and if you go by the various regions that have been involved, every continent apart from Antarctica is involved to a great extent. If you go to the India tally, there are around 445 confirmed cases with over around approximately 4 lakh deaths that have happened in India. So the situation is quite grave, particularly due to COVID. So, and corneal transplantation has really had a big effect on all of these situations. In fact, in a matter of week, when the first lockdown was there, United States virtually came to a halt for the ophthalmic care there, including elective corneal transplantation. In fact, this is 2020 March, the volume of tissue distribution became about 7% domestically and internationally 6%, and which reduced to about 4% domestically in the month of April and 1% in April. So these numbers reduced a lot, and the numbers were even lesser if you compare, if you take India's situation. So the point is that corneal perforations is an emergency. They have a variable presentation. But the problem is that no corneal tissue has been available for the last year or so, and it really makes it challenging. One thing you need to remember is that COVID is here to stay for another year or so. It's not going to go away. So it's time to get smart over here and come up with management guidelines specific to COVID times. I changed it a bit just so that, this is important because, the thing that we have to deal with is the scarcity of the corneal tissue. So we changed our protocol a little bit for the management of corneal perforation with any impending perforation. This was made by Dr. Nikunj and myself when we were working together. So any impending perforation, we did a TA-BCL, TA using cyanoacrylate glue or a multi-layered AMG. For 1 to 2 mm perforations, we went ahead with a TA plus BCI. Now the tricky situation comes in perforations which are more than 2 mm and you don't have a tissue. So then we did a TA-BCL, or we did an innovative technique using a surgical drape. I'll show videos of that, a TENS patch graft, or a conjunctival flap as well, conjunctival pedicle flap. For larger perforations, because tissue was scarce, so we did a gentle B scan. It's ideally not indicated in perforated eyes, but we did a gentle B scan over here, and if there were any vitreous exudates, we went ahead with evisceration considering the scarcity of the tissue. And if it was normal, we did a modified Gunderson's flap. So one thing that you need to know specifically for now situations is tissue, if you use it judiciously and preserve the scleral rim. And this can be done, any tissue, if you're not using, you can shift it to glycerine and it can be used up to a year. I've used about 10 tissues like this and they are still stored in glycerine, 10 tissues at a time, and then we continue to use it. So coming to the first technique, this is another perforated eye. So first thing that you have to do is dry the surface and then you can apply cyanoacrylate glue. It can be applied using a 26 gauge or a 30 gauge needle like this in a drop fashion, or you can put the drop on the over surface of the cap of a needle and just touch it and then bring it out. Then it dries and then you can just put the BCL. Now this is another case where what we did use is after drying the cornea, we used a surgical drape. Now this surgical drape is the eyelash drape that you get along with your normal drape. It was cut into size slightly around 30-40%, oversizing the size of the perforation. And immediately after the application of glue, this was the sticky side of it was put on it for it to dry. Once it was dried, another drop of glue was put, and then a BCL was put. The BCL was put immediately or just about 5 seconds after the glue was put. So it was a 4-layer protection: glue followed by drape, followed by glue, and then the BCL also sticking to the drape because of the cyanoacrylate glue. So this really made it well. This is another thing that we did is this was a perforated ulcer, as you can see. Ideally, this would require a patch graft or an eccentric graft. So after drying, cyanoacrylate glue was applied over here. And immediately after that, or a couple of seconds later, this surgical eyelash drape, plastic drape was put over it. And once it dried completely, then we tried to form the anterior chamber, where I went inside with a 26 gauge needle, injected air. And you can see that the air is not going across. It means that the iris is stuck to the back of this perforated side. So I made a side port, injected some OVD. You can do it under air also. But then I used the iris positive to release this iris. And there was some bleeding, obviously, because of touching of the iris. And the BSS was used to wash the AC, and followed by a full air bubble injection. So after this, another drop of glue was applied, followed by a BCL, which was just stuck to it. Again, a 4-layer protection. And if you look at the follow-up of this patient, this after the drape was applied, this patient, the surgery was done on 23rd July 2020, and 2nd September, this is what he looked like. The recently, now what we have done is the epithelialization has taken place. It has healed well. We've taken out the drape also, and he's awaiting keratoplasty. So this is another thing that sometimes you can do this also. Instead of using the sticky part of the plastic part, you can use a corneal, you can use a cardboard part of it, the paper part of it, and just put it intrastromally in the way that I have put it. You need to remember over here, these are temporary procedures to save the eye, and these are not permanent procedures. So at that time, anything can be done. And so again, glue was applied, and after glue was applied, injected into the chamber, followed by the application of a BCL. Okay, so this is some situations do require the sterile patch graft. So therefore, glycerine preserved scale rims can be used. So never waste any even small part of the tissue. You should not be wasting, particularly in these times. So this was a limbal taper tissue loss who underwent a sterile patch graft. The AC was formed, conjunctiva was sutured, and did patient pretty well. This is a picture courtesy Dr. Nikunj Tang. So this was a corneal perforation with a uveal prolapse, which he managed with an advanced pedicle flap, conjunctival flap. The idea over here you have to understand in such situations is you have to not just take a conjunctiva flap. The Tiemann's is the tough structure, so you need to take it into account. So this is a modified Gunderson's flap. Ideally, such large melts, you can't do anything about it. You need to do a PK. But because tissue was not there, modified Gunderson's flap is again where you take the Tiemann's along with the conjunctiva, because conjunctiva is very fair, it is not going to hold. After a month or so, this flap retracted and centrally intact. I did well, and I eventually underwent a PK. The next technique is the Tiemann's patch graft. Remember, all of these things that you're doing, particularly a Tiemann's patch graft or a conjunctival pedicle flap, you need to oversize the graft that you're using by 40% to the size that you're going to use, to the size of the defect or the size of the perforation. So this is another case that was managed with the TABCL by Dr. Nikunj Tang. This June 2020, this looked like this, underwent a TABCL. Then it healed by September 2020, and you can see a lot of vascularization. Again, it was done, fine needle diathermy was done, the vessels regressed, and PK was done by him on October 2020. End of October, he developed a suturated infiltrate, and this was then managed accordingly. Followed by December, this looked like this, and this patient did very, very well. I just saw him about a week back also. He's doing very well. He does have an epiretinal membrane. He's a diabetic patient, so you need to be more careful in such eyes. The other eye has mild NPDR. So, but now the next plan is to do an SFIL for his visual rehabilitation. So you have to be patient, and these cases take a lot of time. So special thanks to Dr. Nikunj Tang. And just remember, vitamin for this IC, it's now time to get smart. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karan. It was an excellent presentation. It reminded me of our days in Best Together in Sitapur, where we were trying so hard to save so many perforated corneal ulcers because patient presents with perforated corneal ulcer there more often. So Dr. Anand Pasari was next, but he's still not ready with the presentation. I'll be going next. So my talk is about. I'm really sorry, I'm not able to share the screen. Chemical injuries. You have to rush for it. Okay, are my slides visible and am I audible?
Yeah, Nikunj.
Yeah.
Visible.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be talking about chemical injuries of the cornea and especially the medical and early emergency management of the chemical injuries. So chemical injury is one of the true ophthalmic emergency, and any form of delay in the primary treatment can lead to devastating sight-threatening complications. So we have to be very prompt with the management. So all generally call the chemical injury patients presents with symptoms of pain, photophobia, lacrimation, and diminution of vision because of the involvement of cornea. And all chemical injuries causes ocular surface burn. And severity of the burn depends on various factors, including surface area of the contact, concentration and amount of substance being exposed, time of first intervention, depth of penetration into the tissue, duration of contact of the chemical, and also degree of limbal stem cell injury. We all know that alkali are the more notorious chemicals which penetrate rapidly into the deeper tissue by causing disruption of the cell membrane and necrosis. They cause saponification of the cell membrane and breaks the intercellular bridges as well, which helps them to penetrate rapidly and into the deeper tissue. You can see the photograph showing necrosis of the conjunctival blood vessel in a severe chemical injury, which gives a cooked fish eye appearance, where cornea is a chalky white. Whereas acids causes rapid denaturation of the protein into the corneal stroma, which forms a precipitate layer, and it will prevent further deeper penetration of the chemical into the tissue. But this is only applicable for mild acids. Highly corrosive acids, strong acids will penetrate very rapidly into the corneas and into the tissue, and it causes even dangerous, more complicated damage than even alkalis. So more than 25,000 chemicals have been identified which can cause injuries to the eyes. And amongst them, common acids are sulfuric acid, which is present in battery acids and industrial cleaners, acetic acid in the form of vinegar, and hydrochloric acid, which is present in many of the household cleaning solutions. Common alkalis are ammonium hydroxide, which is present in fertilizers and farming related chemicals, refrigerants. Another alkali is sodium hydroxide, which is in the form of caustic soda, which is readily available in people and patients can get exposed to that. Most dangerous one of them is calcium hydroxide or lime, which is present in cement, plaster, or whitewash. So it is important to classify these chemical injuries because that will help for prognosticating the cases and also help in the treatment of further treatment. So there are two classification systems generally followed: Propper-Hall and Dua's classification. In randomized controlled trials, it has been shown that for acute burns, Dua's classification is superior to the Roper-Hall classification in predicting outcome of the severe chemical burns. But in clinical practice, both classification systems are used. So Roper-Hall classification has 4 grades. It is based on the limbal ischemia and corneal involvement. But I will be talking more in detail about the Dua's classification, which has got 6 grades, and it is based on the limbal involvement in the form of clock hours and conjunctival involvement. So grade 1 to 3 have good prognosis, where limbal involvement is less and conjunctival involvement is less. Grade 4 cases where you actually need to be different about the management, where limbal involvement is 6 to 9 clock hours and conjunctival involvement is more than 50 to 75% of the cases. These cases may require early surgical intervention also. Grade 5 has guarded to poor prognosis, where limbal involvement is 9 to 12 clock hours and conjunctival involvement is 75 to 100%. In grade 6 has very poor prognosis, where there is a total involvement of limbus and conjunctiva. So I will be talking about immediate medical management, early medical management, and early surgical management in this presentation, because that is more important for the long-term outcome. So at the time of presentation, you need to take basic history about the time of injury. Was there any intervention done in the form of eye wash or mechanism of injury? What type of chemical was patient got exposed to? If the packaging is available, you need to look at the concentration as well. First and foremost, you need to check the pH of the ocular surface, where that standard pH paper can be used by folding it and putting it over the ocular surface and then compared with the standardized colors. Goals of the management is removing the offending agent is most important by doing a vigorous eye wash. Promote the ocular surface healing by controlling inflammation, preventing infection, and controlling intraocular pressure. So immediate management involves copious irrigation of the eye where every second counts. We can use normal saline or Ringer's lactate or balanced salt solution for that. In extreme emergency cases where nothing is available, tap water can also be used, but there is always a risk of infection with that. So IV set is used, which is connected to the irrigation bottle, and it is kept at a particular height, and then fluid is directed towards the ocular surface. Remember that it should be done under topical anesthesia because patients are in a painful condition. So first you need to remove the pain, then only they will be able to open the eyes and cooperate for the same. Eversion of the upper lid and lower lid is important, and do a copious irrigation through that. Sometimes even double eversion using Descemet retractor is also needed. It is recommended to wash the eye for 20 to 30 minutes, and endpoints will be neutralization of the pH. If you can use eye speculum also and ask the patient to move in all the gazes and check for the deeper fornices, and if any solid material is found there, you can either use the bud to remove it or take a forceps to remove those particles. There has been a clinical evidence that BSS was more preferred as and it was more comfortable to the patients than compared to normal saline. And if available, BSS can be used, and generally BSS is available in ophthalmic setup because it is used for intraocular surgery as well. Remember that in any suspected open globe injury or suspected perforation or a clinically evident perforation, eye wash should be avoided. Another important part of early management is topical steroids. So this is the condition where actually the ocular surface, the epithelium is poor, and still you need to give steroids because most of the ophthalmologists are reluctant to give steroids when there is an epithelial defect or we are afraid to have a patient getting a secondary infection. But this is the condition where steroids have an utmost important role. It reduces the neutrophil infiltration and prevents the damage by proteolytic enzymes. However, for prolonged use, it also impairs the stromal healing by reducing collagen synthesis and by inhibiting fibroblast migration, and which leads to increased chances of sterile ulcer formation, which can get secondarily infected. So steroid has to be tapered off after 7 to 10 days. Ascorbic acid promotes the synthesis of mature collagen by corneal fibroblasts, and it is recommended to use topical sodium ascorbate 10% every 2 hourly in addition to the systemic dose. Preservative-free antibiotics are recommended for prophylactic use. In cases where you are suspecting microbial keratitis or there is a clinically evident microbial keratitis, fortified antibiotics may also need to be used, but along with that, there is a chance of having ocular surface toxicity, so you have to be watchful for that. Sodium citric acid has been proven to be powerful inhibitor of the neutrophil activity. It decreases the intensity of the inflammatory response by causing chelation of extracellular calcium, which is needed for collagenase. So Orolab has, I have no financial interest. Orolab has made it available in the form of sodium citrate, the sodium citrate 10% with the name of orocitrate, and combined use of citrate with ascorbate has therapeutic advantage. Apart from its antibiotic properties, tetracyclines reduces the effect of matrix metalloproteinase. It inhibits the alpha-1 antitrypsin degradation. So topical and systemic form of doxycycline is also recommended for these cases. For IOP control, oral acetazolamide is preferred. For topical IOP lowering agents should be avoided initially because they have because of the ocular surface toxicity, but in delayed management they can be used. Apart from that, preservative-free tear substitutes, topical cycloplegic agents, bandage contact lens, autologous serum are also part of the medical management. Autologous serum from the peripheral blood serum or umbilical cord serum has been shown to promote the ocular surface healing because they are very rich in growth factors. Moving to a few case examples, this is the case of acid injury where there was a mild chemical injury in the form of conjunctival and corneal epithelial defect, which you can see with the fluorescent staining under cobalt blue light. So this patient was managed with the topical steroids and topical antibiotics, preservative-free lubricants, cycloplegics, and bandage contact lens, and patient did fine because there was no much of a limbus stem cell deficiency. This is the case of line injury where patient had 3 to 4 hours of the limbal ischemia. So after initial emergency management, patient was started on topical steroids very frequently for 1 hourly and along with antibiotics and lubricants. Patient was also given topical and systemic ascorbate along with systemic tetracycline. And at the later date, patient was followed up closely, and it healed because of the rest of the limbus was healthy. But cases like this, where there is a severe chemical injury, there is a diffuse conjunctival and limbal ischemia and corneal edema, which require maybe early surgical intervention when they have poor prognosis. So in early surgical management includes debridement of necrotic tissue because that prevents the healing of the ocular surface. In the cases where there is a symblepharon formation, you need to do repeated symblepharon lysis. Amniotic membrane has an important role in ocular surface inflammation control and promotion of the healing, and Tenon's advancement. So Tenon's advancement is done to re-establish the limbal circulation. The viable, healthy vascularized Tenon capsule is advanced up to the limbal area to cover the ischemic area, and which will limit the necrosis of the tissue, aseptic ulceration, and scleral perforation. Amniotic membrane has got multiple growth factors, including transforming growth factor beta and epidermal growth factor, which promotes the epithelialization, and it reduces the scarring by controlling and suppressing the inflammation. So this is the video courtesy by Dr. Nidhi, where early symblepharon release was done. The patient presented with the almost near total epithelial defect and more than 6 to 9 clock hours of limbal ischemia. So amniotic membrane is placed over the ocular surface, following which the amniotic membrane is elevated and fibrin glue is applied. Similarly, the fibrin glue is also applied on the inferior part. Then the amniotic membrane is then ironed out all over the surface. A purse string stay suture is taken with the 10-0 nylon over the peripheral part of the cornea to secure the amniotic membrane and prevent its slippage. And the peripheral part of the amniotic membrane is sutured using 8-0 vicryl here. You can use 10-0 vicryl or 10-0 nylon also for the same. After with the meticulous management and close follow-up, patient did well post-operative. So delayed surgical management is actually the most important part for the final outcome, including there is a lot of research going on with the limbal stem cell transplantation. Dr. Himanshu sir is expert in that, and that is also my area of interest for the same. I will not be talking about that because that is beyond the scope of this instruction course. To conclude, prompt and copious irrigation remains the single most important intervention for emergency management of chemical injuries by any chemical. Classification system should be used to estimate prognosis and guiding the treatment, and we need to educate the patients regarding prevention of this exposure of the chemicals in the workplace and use of safety equipments. Thank you so much.
Great presentation, Dr. Nikunj.
Thank you so much. Next is Dr. Anand Pasari. Anand sir, are you ready?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Nikunj, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Dr. Anand Pasari sir is a director and consultant for cornea, cataract, and refractive services at Indriya Eye and ENT Hospital in Nagpur. He is ex-fellow of the cornea and anterior segment services from LVP. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Nikunj, for having me over here. After these excellent presentations on corneal emergencies by Dr. Karan on corneal ulcers, on chemical injuries, and as well. So I'll come to now management of ocular trauma. So I'll be talking on corneal and scleral tears and how should we approaching this. So the ocular trauma is is one of the common corneal emergencies which we come across, and our aim of corneal scleral tear suturing is to have a watertight closure so as to achieve the structural integrity of the wound. So what are the primary aims of corneal suturing? So there should be minimal suture related complications so as to secure closure, no tissue override, and no posterior wound creep, so as to achieve the best possible wound strength with minimal tissue loss. So what are the suture materials we use for these repairs? So for corneal tissue suturing, we primarily use 10-0 nylon, or at times 9-0 or 8 or 11-0 nylon, and for sclera we primarily use 6-0 vicryl or 7-0 vicryl or silk. So what are the primary principles of corneal suturing? So there should be minimal tissue handling so as to avoid maceration and cheese wiring. the entry should be 0.75 to 1 millimeter away from the wound edge, perpendicular to the wound margin, so as to the depth of the entry of the suture has to be at 90% depth of the tissue, so as to achieve the epithelium to epithelium apposition, and the spacing has to be equal on both the sides of the wound unless contraindicated by the local tissue factors. So what do we need to look? So at the once we start the procedure, we have to look at the anatomical landmarks to look where is the limbus. Are there any stellate edges of the wound? Are there any sharp angles of laceration? Debris, if any, needs to be removed, and iris or vitreous incarceration, if anything, needs to be removed, and sutures are applied at right angles to the wound edge to avoid any slippage. So let me come to the very important concept of compression factors. So this is most important thing, that the sutures result in wound apposition by compressing the tissue in its loop. So if this is the laceration, and this is the loop of the suture, the interrupted sutures leave a plane of compression along the loop, and the zone of the compression extends away from the suture. So the compression zones are triangular in shape, and the wound closure is achieved when there is an overlap of the compression zones. So this is the most important concept which we need to understand while we are doing a corneal suturing. And the compression zones need to overlap so as to achieve a watertight closure and avoid any wound leak. So the compression factors, what are the area of the compression depends on the length of the loop. And longer sutures in the visual axis lead to greater tissue distortion and greater astigmatism, and larger sutures and hence not are preferred to be avoided in the visual axis. So what are the suturing techniques for corneal tear repairs? So primarily, these are what the technique is, the interrupted corneal tear suturing. That is the most preferred technique. At times, we need to use running sutures or purse string sutures or box sutures, depending on the local tissue factors of the tear. So this is a simple corneal tear, which is sutured primarily taking a perpendicular suture and just putting these perpendicular sutures to the laceration. A simple closure is achieved, and the suture knots are buried. So next, we can come across a triangular flap in which we need to apply the first suture at the apex of the tear, and the rest of the sutures need to be applied perpendicular to the triangular flaps. So here is a video of this. So now here it's a triangular tear, and the first suture is applied at the apex, and then rest of the sutures are applied perpendicular to the edges of the tear. Then we may come across limbus to limbus tear, in which we put the first suture at the limbus, and rest of the sutures are slowly put perpendicular. So there is another technique of Rovsey technique, in which repair is started. This is primarily in cases of limbus to limbus sutures, in which repair is started with longer sutures in the periphery, and the length decreases as we go to the visual axis. The corneal center is sutured with small and widely placed suture with minimal compression zone overlap, and this reduces the astigmatism. So there's some cases we need to put purse string sutures whenever there is a kind of a Y-shaped laceration, and we need to put a purse string sutures, and sometimes we may come across stellate wounds. So in that case, we might need to put some bridging sutures. They might need to use a purse string sutures, and there might be need for a purse string suture and a combination with multiple interrupted sutures. So then another thing we come across corneoscleral or primary scleral tears. In these cases, again, as I said, the first suture needs to be applied at the limbus so as to achieve the good anatomical apposition, and then the corneal tears part may be done, or scleral tear may be started. But then most important is to first put the first suture on the limbus, and then the sclera may be sutured using the Vicarial sutures. So this sums up my presentation. So the suturing of the corneal and the scleral tear at appropriate time with the appropriate technique may help us not only to save eye but also to save vision. Thank you. Thank you for having me over here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ansar. That was a very nice presentation with multiple case examples. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Himanshu sir. We all know Himanshu sir. He don't need any introduction. Dr. Himanshu sir is a medical superintendent of Narayana Nethralaya Electronic City branch. He is also head of cornea refractive and ocular surface services. He also heads the stem cell research laboratory of Narayana Nethralaya. He has been my mentor during my post-graduation, and he is the reason my keen interest in cornea. So he'll be talking about emergencies after refractive surgery. Over to you, Himanshu sir.
Thank you, Nikunj, and wonderful to be here. Let me just share my slides. There you go. Okay, great. At the outset, I would like to congratulate your young team to put up a stellar show here, and it's really nice to see how great work you all are doing. I would also like to acknowledge a tremendous help by my colleague, Dr. Nandini, to make this presentation. Basically, when we talk about the emergency following refractive surgery, why do we need treatment? Well, if we do not do treatment, we may end up with significant morbidity. And hence, in emergencies, you will require emergency actions also. By definition, what do we mean by emergency in the refractive surgeries? These are the conditions which would require immediate attention or treatment. And if it is not treated on time, well, it will significantly compromise vision or quality of life. Mind you, these patients are normal young patients, and if not treated, they can significantly get affected. Now I'm going to take up these things in two phases, one before flap and another under flap, and I cannot take up everything, hence I'm taking up the important aspect only. One of them is epithelial defect. Now, epithelial defect can occur intraoperatively because of overuse of topical anesthetic drop, or your marking or suction ring, microkeratome, even handling of the flap using any forceps or the dehydration. So remember, do not put unnecessary anesthetic drop multiple times prior to the surgery. One drop just before is good enough. Do not allow the flaps to get dehydrated, and they would lead to such kind of epithelial effect. Another thing during the surgery or the end of the surgery, which can lead to epithelial defect, is speculum removal. Simple thing like speculum removal can actually lead to epithelial defect. Now, depending upon the site of epithelial defect, if it's a central epithelial defect, it can significantly affect the visual quality. If it's a peripheral defect, it can have potential of having an epithelial ingrowth and hence need to be treated. Treatment-wise, well, the drops, whichever you're using, preferably should be preservative-free. So if it's an antibiotic, moxifloxacin, or the lubricants without preservative are good. Bandage contact lens are something which are mandatory in these cases, and it's better to put bandage contact lens. When you have epithelial defect, they can have significant pain, and hence systemic analgesics like gabapentin can work wonders. What happens if we do not treat them? Well, if we do not treat the epithelial defect, there can be chance of stromal melting infection. There can be chance of DLCAN, which is extremely common whenever you have epithelial defect. And in the area of epithelial defect, you will have diffuse lamellar keratitis. You can actually end up with a recurrent corneal erosion also in such kind of cases, and hence need to be treated. Coming to the next part, which is flap dislodgement. Now, flap dislodgement can lead to significant discomfort, pain, decreased vision, and it's an emergency where patient comes to you with such kind of thing, and possibly in emergency hours also. Now, if that occurs usually in the early 24 hours, that's usually related to lid squeezing, eye rubbing by patient, or forceful blinking also. But later on, usually it does not spontaneously dislodge, and it's most commonly related to trauma. Now, incidence-wise, it's not very common, but it can happen. The outcome of treatment in earlier dislodgement is much better than somebody presents with much later presentation. Well, how do we treat? If it's a partial dislocation, you have to reposit the flap as early as possible. However, please lift it up, wash it thoroughly with saline as well as antibiotic. If you want to put, you can just put there, and put a BCL. Make sure there are no trapped epithelial cell underneath. If it's a complete flap dislocation, and if patient presents a little later, and if you have lost the landmark there, then it becomes a little difficult to put it, and the outcome may not be as great. Also, there can be very high risk of epithelial ingrowth and significant distortion of the flap, as well as visual disturbance. Such kind of flap may require suturing and BCL. Improperly reposited flap can lead to astigmatism. So what happens if we do not treat the flap displacement? It can lead to fixed folds or epithelial ingrowth. The next part is the flap striae. The flap striae can be pretty common, especially the microstriae. However, the macrostriae may not be as common. They are easily diagnosed on slit lamp, as well as on the retroillumination, fundus retroillumination, or on slit lamp or on surgical microscope. They can be wonderfully seen. They can lead to irregular astigmatism or distorted Myas. They can also be seen on fluorescent staining. Now, treatment-wise, we have to debride the epithelium. That's very important. Otherwise, it goes into fixed fold. Now, during that, it's better to dilate the patient so that you can have retroillumination. Do not do under surgical microscope of your LASIK machine, but your normal OT microscope is better. Lift the flap, hydrate the flap, repose it by stretching it, and if required, you can put suture or fibrin glue also. Coming to beneath flap, the diffuse lamellar keratitis comes to the first of thing which can happen. Though it's an idiopathic inflammation, it usually happens earlier in the post-op period, and patient can be asymptomatic or can have mild irritation or pain. Usually related to things like your surgical intervention with betadine drapes, powder, your mebamin secretion, the epithelial defect, as well as the intra-procedure. It can be divided based on the staging. If it is very mild and in periphery stage 1, a topical treatment is good enough. Stage 2, which is little diffuse, you may have to use more of a frequent steroid. Stage 3 may require systemic steroid, and you may have to lift the flap. And stage 4 usually requires scraping as well as lifting of the flap, as well as systemic steroids. Treatment-wise, as I told you, the lifting of the flap requires washing and removing of all these noxious material, and continue with your topical as well as systemic steroid. Coming to the next part, which is central toxic keratopathy, which is pretty commonly confused with diffuse lamellar keratitis. However, it's a unique feature that it's a non-inflammatory. It can be confused with stage 4, but remember this picture, when you see such fixed folds, deep folds, it's nothing but central toxic keratopathy. It is something which does not require flap lift. So unnecessarily, please do not lift the flap. It does not respond to steroids. So unnecessarily, do not pour too much steroid. It can occur with LASIK, PRK, SMILE, anything. And at long term, it resolves on its own with the hyperopic shift. Management wise, it's wait and watch, nothing much you can do. Reassure the patient, and they should be fine. Next is the pressure-induced stomal keratitis or interface fluid. It can look like DLK, but it usually would be bilateral and would be associated with raised IOP. Many times the IOP can be underestimated with GATS, so you may want to use your tonopen, but the best diagnosis is done using an AS-OCT. On a careful slit lamp examination, you can see the pocket. Treatment-wise, stop the steroids, start anti-glaucoma, and patient should be fine. The next part is a more dreaded complication, which is microbial keratitis. The microbial keratitis can be devastating and sight-threatening. It can happen at any step, and it can be influenced by anything from your microkeratome blade, which is reused if at all, your topical treatment, bandage, contact lens, epithelial defect, interface fluid, anything can lead to such kind of thing. Early onset usually is related to gram-positive organisms. Later on, it can be mycobacterium and fungal. The treatment earlier is better. Usually such kind of thing requires flap lift, and which reduces the load of organism, as well as it gives you better yield in your management. Finally, some peculiar presentations like Barry or Bate, which is sudden pigment dispersion, usually occurs because of moxifloxacin, either systemic or topical. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Nimrita, my ex-fellow and good friend, who had such kind of complication in a few of her cases and presented beautifully. And it leads to significant pigment dispersion in the eye, and ultimately leads to significant raised IOP, which may not come under control with whatever medication you use. Remember, the culprit here was BCL soaked in moxifloxacin. So every time pouring moxifloxacin on the surface may not be the best idea. To conclude, complication following keratorefractive surgery can be emergencies leading to significant ocular morbidity, and appropriate treatment can prevent the ill effect. Prevention is always better than cure, and treatment is always better than no intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It is always wonderful to listen to your talks, and there is always so much to learn from it for youngsters like me. And it was an honor to have you here, sir. Next, we move on to our next presenter, Dr. Anant Avdutrao Deshpande, sir. Sir is a director of Guru Prasad Netralaya in Aurangabad, Maharashtra. He is one of the few medico-legal consultants in India. He is also the chairman of legal committee of AOS and Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society. He is also chairman for Indian Medical Legal Consulting Services. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Welcome to all. I will share my screen. Yes. From where? Slideshow.
Sir, you can start the slides.
Yeah, slideshow.
The beginning.
From beginning, sir. First one.
First beginning. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to all. After having a heavy dose of the knowledge about the injuries, their treatment, their manipulations, their surgeries, and taking care, even after then also, the medico-legal can arise. And this medico-legal arises in two ways. So first is that the medico-legal may be because of the assault done by the other, causing the injury or the chemical burns, and you are called in the court as a witness. So you have to keep your records very well with figures, records, photos and everything, and you should be able to speak in the court very nicely. Secondly, even after your all treatment, you can become, the patient can become unsatisfied, and he can generate his auto medico-legal, and he can put a case either in the criminal court or in the civil court as a Consumer Protection Act. So if this happens, maybe because of the traumatic injuries, the corneal emergencies, as you said so much, chemical injuries, infection leading to the perforation or cornea, and the promotion of corneal opacification, graft rejection, refractive or other corneal surgeries. But all because of the precautions to be taken in traumatic injuries. First of all, that whether the patient is life-threatening position. So you have to see this in medical legal, that whether the patient is life-threatening. If the patient is in the life-threatening position and you are treating the corneal conditions, and patient may die. So that is a very big medical legal problem. And so you have to judge the patient. And if it is there, you shift the patient to the ICU or and save the life, and after giving a primary treatment. When patient is stable, carry out further ophthalmic and legal procedures. If grievous injury, then inform police by a duplicate information later and get signature, date and time on duplicate copy. This is very important in particularly in assaults, as chemical burns, throwing of the acids or something on the face, and so it saves the doctor. Legal liabilities may be civil liabilities. Cases of CPA court will come civil court, MCI or state medical councils. So the patient can complain, go in the CPA court. Normally he goes in the CPA court because he gets the money from there. The civil court, he will never go because the results are very poor after so many years and so many years. MCI or state medical council, he may go, but he doesn't achieve anything except taking the action on the doctors, the happiness of taking the action. Health services or leaders as MP, MLA or such authority for loss of earning due to loss vision because of unfit or job of profession. So this may, he can claim the money. Criminal liabilities, FIR in police station, criminal cases in criminal court, he can lodge down. The criminal complaint may be for negligence resulting in loss of reduction of vision or privation of organ or disfiguration of the face. That is, maybe that he was having 6/6 vision and he lost his and has come to 660 and he is not able to do the job. He can go for the criminal or a privation of the whole the eye has lost, he may say. And this is because of the negligence of the doctor. He has not taken the care when there was an emergency and he came to him. Or disfiguration of the face because of the treatment of the doctor, or it is not true that nothing is blame true that doctor has intentionally done, but patient can claim that because of negligence of the doctor, disfiguration is there. So under Consumer Protection Act CPA, the doctor or hospital is sued for negligence and not for complications which are mentioned in the textbook. So well remember that complication is not a negligence, but not knowing the complication, not taking proper steps to rectify it, not referring or not taking help of proper specialist, or leaving the patient on the unqualified or underqualified subordinates is negligence. So case is based on negligence in CPA court and not on the complication basis. So remember very well, the doctor will not be held responsible under negligence if the treatment is as per the standard textbooks and the accepted professional and practice, and still patient suffers a loss or injury. So this is the more important thing, that if you are treating the patient according to the books, journals or anything, but sometimes if you have tried a new thing on the patient and patient may say that doctor he done the trials on me and he may ask the compensation. So, or merely because a complication has happened. So in particularly when one is doing the trials and it is not mentioned anywhere, neither in the books nor in the journals, it should be specially taken the consent from the patient that I am trying to do the best for you, and it is, though it may not be useful in future, but I am trying my best. So the medical man is not an insurer. He does not warrant successfulness of the treatment or cure of the patient. So this is very important. This decision is given by the Supreme Court. So the guarantee of curing is not there. The thing is that you have to take the maximum care and nowhere negligence. The legal aspects of the corneal emergencies may happen in solo practice or in trust or the corporate hospital. So the practitioner may be solo or it may be big hospital. The legal liabilities are different in solo practice and trust or corporate hospitals. Because this decision, Supreme Court, Consumer Protection Act, civil liability on for negligence. The solo practice, it is the responsibility as he is the owner of the hospital. So if he demands anything for the damages, the money will go from either the pocket of the doctor or the hospital or insurance. So it is his only solo practice and solo responsibility. But in corporate, trust or government hospital, it is the hospital responsibility, as the Supreme Court has given the decision that the patient, once they are admitted to such hospital, it is the responsibility to satisfy that all possible care was taken and no negligence was involved in attending the patient. So in fact, it is the hospital who engages the treating doctor, therefore it is their responsibility. So this is a triangle. What Consumer Protection Act says that the consumer has the right. Who is the consumer here? The hospital is receiving the money, he is giving the bill receipt, and so he is the consumer, and the doctor is giving services to the hospital. So the doctor is service provider and hospital is again consumer. So this is a triangle. So directly patient cannot say that my money was given to the doctor unless it is really given. And so he doesn't become the consumer of the doctor. So this Supreme Court decisions applies to that. No individual doctor is liable and can be held jointly or severely liable. Even visiting doctors or consulting doctors in private hospital cannot be held liable. So this is also important, who are running their own hospitals and the peoples are coming to their hospital, operating or treating, they are liable instead of the who is doing the surgery. The consumer does not avail services of such doctors individually by paying fees or consideration to those doctors directly. So this is the very important, because if they are not paying directly doctor, they are not consumer of the doctor. But in criminal liabilities of negligence, doctor and hospital both are responsible, irrespective of which type of hospital it is. So doctor is always responsible in criminal liabilities, and criminal liabilities may happen. So Supreme Court has given also the decision, for every mishap or death during medical treatment, the medical man cannot be proceeded against for punishment. Thank you very much. So this is very important, that the civil liability can be on the hospital if it is a trust hospital, but criminal liability is mainly on the doctors. He is to be punished and he has to give the fine also. Hospitals cannot be punished, only can be charged for the fines. So this is very important thing. And so the corneal injuries causing loss or disfiguration may be a cause of medico-legal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deshpande sir. We are right on time, so we'll take few questions and then we'll conclude the session. I would like to start with Dr. Deshpande sir. Sir, I recently shifted to private practice, and many of our youngsters, we don't have a professional indemnity insurance. So what is your recommendation to for the professional indemnity insurance, and what amount it should cover?
So now the district forums are given the powers to cause or order more than 1 crore. Previously, it was only 20 lakhs. So even at a district level, if the patient goes, he can get money more than 1 crore. So it is always better to be insured up to at least 1 crore. Nowadays, 1 crore insurance, if it is to be taken from an insurance company, it costs about 30,000 rupees per year. But we have planned in the Medico Legal Consulting Services Private Limited, that which I should say that this is interest in my this, and so I am telling now this because for the benefit of the doctors, that this is in Indian Medico Legal Consulting Private Limited company can give this insurance within 7,200, giving all the benefits which other companies are giving, plus criminal liabilities are also covered to the extent of court charges and fines, but not the imprisonment, because that cannot be. So it is always better to have at least 1 crore, and it is possible to have at a lower level of 7,200 for 1 crore if you go to the Indian Medico Legal Consulting Private Limited Services. Other companies are giving, but the cost is very high, 30,000, 23,000 or something. So that is the choice of the doctor where he has to give. Apart from that, the Indian Medico Legal Consulting Service Private Limited Services give the consultation, free consultation, and all support in all levels from the phone to the decision of the case.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Nidhi, you have few questions.
Yeah. Is Dr. Karan here?
Yes, I am here. Yes, I am here.
So congratulations on your new technique with the
Voice has broken. I can't hear.
surgical
Nidhi, your
I
screen
just
is
wanted to
frozen.
ask you, what is the time when you'll remove? Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So the surgical tape that we are using for corneal perforations, what is the timing to remove those tapes?
See, what I follow is anytime between 1 and 3 months. But you have, see, the thing is, you don't have to pull it out. You have to wait for the epithelialization to take place. It has to become loose. Once it becomes loose, that is only when I take it out. Because and you have to always be wary when you're taking out these glues, is that a perforation can occur at any time. There could be a small perforation. So you have to be careful and be ready to again do the glue, and consent has to be taken for that as well at the same time. But anytime after 1 month, I start.
Okay, and here, because we are gluing the contact lens, bandage contact lens as well. So if it has to stay for a longer time, we cannot change the contact lens. So are you using any different material, or is it the regular contact lens?
The regular contact lens only. So nothing with that. One thing is, like, if it's a fungal ulcer that is perforated or something, then I would prefer to use non-suspensions, because suspensions accumulate. So I would prefer to use voriconazole. However, depending on the organism, you have to treat.
I just wanted to know, so with the surgical drape, over a period of time, say you have it for 1 or 2 months, do you expect more vascularization to come in that area than, say, just doing a glue or doing a Tenon's patch graft? That was something I was wondering.
Yes, there is more vascularization associated. So, but the thing is, the aim over here is to save the eye, and vision is not our primary thing at that moment. So, after that is healed, we can do an FND when we do a PK or a simultaneous PK and FND. That's what I go ahead with. But vascularization is more, definitely.
Dr. Nidhi, you have another question? Yeah.
Hello, I have a question for Dr. Himanshu, sir. Is sir here?
Yeah, very much here.
Yes, sir. Sir, for Simlefron release in acute chemical injuries, what is the time in which we acutely manage it and release the Simlefron, and the long-term inflammation to go down and then do the release?
Okay, so basically, the aim of acute chemical injury, first most important aim is reepithelialization. So if you're able to achieve reepithelialization, rest everything becomes less important, because once the epithelialization occurs, the melting of the cornea seldom occurs. It does not occur. So that's my first goal. Now, second part, when you have any chemical injury where you have significant symblepharon at the time of presentation, now when you are doing an amniotic membrane transplant, and if you're able to severe that presentation, and I mean symblepharon, and use your amniotic membrane to take care of that symblepharon initially, I would be fine. But I won't sacrifice my conjunctival tissue, or I won't sacrifice my oral mucosal tissue in acute injury part, because you really don't know how this is going to at long run fare up. So symblepharon in initial period, if it is like you have just severed it, and if it is just coming back, putting any conformer is good enough. Putting amniotic membrane, forming the fornices with that is good enough. But I don't think I would want to do any major symblepharon release in acute case.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I would like to ask question to Dr. Tushar. Dr. Tushar, what is your preferred lubricating of choice in cases of filamentary keratitis? I mean, what do you prefer in your cases?
Honestly, I don't think it really matters which lubricant you use. You can use CMC 1% or even CMC 0.5%, but do it frequently. More importantly, you need to kind of break that chain. So if you have filaments, debride them once with forceps, because there is usually associated inflammation. A short course of a surface steroid also works really well. And I do like to place a BCL as well for some time. So that does help in most cases. For me, the choice of lubricant doesn't really matter too much, in my opinion. Maybe Himanshu sir's opinion would be great to have here.
I totally agree with you, Tushar. You're spot on. I really don't think choice of lubricant would make a huge difference there, because that's not the etiological factor which has led to the filamentary keratitis. So we would be expecting too much by pouring some lubricant to think that the filaments would disappear, which is less likely to happen. So as you rightly said, that we remove the filaments, try to see how we can prevent the recurrence of that, and then along with that we can surely treat it. More importantly is the frequency of lubricants. Many times we try to just increase the viscoelasticity by going 1%, and God knows if we have 2%, 5%, we would want to use them, but that does not hydrate the cell most of the time. So increasing viscosity does not always mean that it's going to help us in these conditions. Many times, in fact, lower viscous agent can be more hydrating. In fact, in Japan and those places, when they use for the hydration, they actually use BSS solution. They get in sterile smaller pack. So they use sodium hyaluronate along with alternating with a hydrating solution, which is BSS, and not even. So you think about, there is no viscosity at all, but it has more hydration power there. So yeah, combining such kind of thing, sodium hyaluronate and 0.5 CMC or something like Optive or something can actually help. So have both of them together and more frequent.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. I would like to ask a question to Dr. Anand Pasari, sir. Sir, in cases where there is a limbal to limbal tear, so do you prefer the same 10-0 nylon suture to close the limbal part, or you use a 9-0, you prefer to use a 9-0, which is a little thicker for the limbal suturing near the limbus?
So in general, Nikunj, I prefer a 10-0 nylon suture because I think it suffices most of the times for the limb, for putting the first suture on the limb. So that I use the same 10-0 nylon in general. Right.
Okay. So I think there are just 30 seconds left. So we will conclude the session here. I would like to thank all the speakers, all the panelists, all the respected teachers for being here on the Sunday morning. And it was a wonderful session. Me and Nidhi both are the youngest one here, and we have learned a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you, doctors. That was
Thank
a
you.
wonderful
Thank
session
you.
and excellent presentations by all the presenters and wonderfully moderated by Dr. Nikunj Dank. We will now conclude this session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll move on to the next session.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you
everybody.
very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everybody.